Hello and welcome to the Omni Gamers Club podcast, the podcast for games on all platforms, like on the air conditioning unit that you're considering putting away, but it's isn't quite cool enough yet. I'm Mark USA.
I am Daniel Winter, and yeah, I was hoping that we'd seen the last of summer, but it's still putting in some final efforts here in Vancouver. Hopefully, not for much longer.
That's the curse of being a Vancouverite, is that it's hot for like 2 months, and then it's
I'm
rainy
already
the rest of the year. And exactly, we complain about the heat while it's here. So I'm just trying to fit that stereotype. But we're actually here to talk about games. This particular episode is one of the playlist episodes where we talk about what we've been playing recently, some news that's interested us, and then next episode we'll be talking about our next mainline game review, so to speak.
Yeah. So what's to
Let's
talk
talk
about today? What's news to you, Mark?
Yeah, there's a range of news going about. So I wanted to point out, I haven't watched it all, but People Make Games, who I mentioned previously, it's Quinton Smith's one of his many channels now, has at least 3 channels. This one's talking about the games industry in general and analog and video game developers and designers and kind of behind the scenes topics. And they put out a really interesting video about military game simulations and how that's directly tied into essentially the military industrial complex and the militaries of major powerful nations out there. And it's a very captivating topic. I know that you and I kind of dally at the very fringes of wargaming. It's not really like our main hobby or something that we've tried some of the heavy hitting titles in, but we're at the edges of it. So it's fascinating to learn about how in demand basically military games are for simulating conflicts, and not just the old ones, but for the future ones that could come. So I'm not going to do a better job at explaining it than the video. So go watch that video.
Yeah, I've not had a chance to check that out yet, but that channel does do a great job of digging into these really niche edge cases of of what games can be used for. They have one on competitive Excel spreadsheeting, for example, and sort of some of the LARPing, like Fallout style LARPing out in the desert. So yeah, covering some really cool fringe cases of the hobby. Wargaming, I mean, yeah, I know like America's Army and some of those have been really big in sort of as a recruiting tactic, not just for strategic sort of purposes. But I did just recently watch the '80s Matthew Broderick film War Games, which is about it's about my extent of how those sort of simulations work.
Right, but I think they're even talking about the very kind of staid, classic push chits across hexagonal grids. So it's simply fascinating. I watched the first like 20 minutes of it or so, and I can't wait to watch the rest of it. How about yourself? What news has caught your eye?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to quickly mention a particularly interesting case in that we've seen a lot of games come and go these last few years, especially in the age of live service games. But there's been a new record these last couple of weeks in that a game has experienced its whole life cycle from start to finish in the space between our playlist episodes, basically. That is Concord, a new sort of multiplayer hero shooter from Sony, published by Sony. Basically was put out August 23rd and basically cancelled less than 2 weeks later. Like the servers have been taken down. You can no longer play that game, which is just a really fascinating case study in how live service games, how tumultuous that side of the hobby is. It's a huge industry, but like pulling people away from those big few titles like your Fortnite and your Call of Duty is a fraught process. And I mean, it's probably a little naive of them to have even attempted it in the first place and sunk 8 years of development into this game, but to then give up it so quickly. It's a little disappointing that they didn't have some resilience. It's like you think like, hey, a 3-year-old taking the marshmallow test would have more sort of a better sense of delayed gratification than the CEOs just dropping the knife on these games. But I guess it's probably another tax write-off somewhere.
I think that's just it. Obviously, you said this game has been in development for 8 years. That means they conceived of it when service games were at the height, and that Destiny was still a shining bright star.
Mm.
And now it's having its struggles still. And there's many, many more really successful free-to-play games on the market there. I think this game was sorely outclassed and undermarketed, and so much has been said about it already. Yeah, this was just really embarrassing mismanagement and bad planning.
Yeah, I said I haven't played the game. Like I can't say whether it was a good game, but you've got to give these things time. No game is going to come out of the gate as a big hitter these days. You've got to
I
let things
100%
percolate.
disagree. I think they shouldn't have put it out there. I
Well,
agree that probably hundreds or if not thousands of developers and artists and creatives worked on this game, and they probably put out their best work on this title. So it's a shame that it's not going to see the light of day. Maybe it'll come back in free-to-play form.
Most likely,
but they've already invested so much money in it. I don't think that they're going to agree to keep spending money for that.
Sunk cost fallacy,
Yeah, I don't think they were just trying to fit some bottom line on a report. They're trying to check a box, and then some manager, is gonna eat it for the decision they made. No, they should have seen the market probably months ago before they were even approaching the launch dates to see how they're faring against their competition.
It's just sad to see another game that people, as I said, I'm sure were passionate and worked very hard on, basically being another sacrificial goat to the whims of the industry.
Right. The developers and artists are not at fault for this business decision. Right. Okay, let's talk about some more game news. So an interesting move that I saw one of my favorite game-related companies make of late is that Humble Bundle, who I talk about at length, I've used for years. I really appreciate their book bundles, especially RPG books, fiction books, audiobooks. They do some great stuff, but I've been a fan of theirs for a long time, mostly for their video game bundles. Now, one thing that you see once in a while is physical games as a bonus. Maybe on a PDF bundle, there might be like one physical book that they do as a one extra tier. But just recently, in collaboration with, I believe it's Renegade Publishing, they put out two bundles. One of them is for the very popular, I guess, IP Transformers, the tabletop role-playing game, and the other is for the equally popular, if not more, Power Rangers IP with the deck-building game. And I believe the latter case is entirely physical. There's no digital product. It's just buy the boxes, we'll send you the boxes. Now, I looked a little bit more closely at the Transformers one because I am of that age. Where Generation 1 was like the hottest thing possible, or my favorite thing possible.
I have a Dinobot somewhere around here, within reaching distance, I'm sure.
Right. So I actually looked a little bit closer, and the majority of what's in that bundle is digital. It is mostly PDFs, and there's like 5 physical items that's available on the highest tier. And I think the majority of them was just a GM screen and a couple of baggies and some dice. So most of the books out of that set you're going to get are in the digital side. And it's much less expensive, much less costly to get those packages. So I don't know. How do you feel about Humble Bundle starting to sell physical products?
It's an interesting development. I've soured somewhat on Humble broadly. I mean, they're a couple of layers in acquisition deep now, and they've started to pump out AI asset packs pretty regularly, and so I've been distancing myself from them. But hey, getting these big bundles of games pretty hard to do in cases where, especially with all these expansions and promos, retail stores aren't necessarily willing to carry all of those. And if you miss out on the Kickstarter, hey, these sorts of products getting harder and harder to get. So a way of bundling all of these things into one is it's good to have another option out there. Hey, that's never a bad thing. I'm again a little bit sour too on just the whole nature of these big bundles of getting all the expansions before you even know the base game, right? That's the sort of thing that Kickstarter is built on.
Yeah, I think Humble is interesting though, because it seems to be like the second or third phase after Kickstarter. So
Mm.
it's sort of like a clearinghouse, or it's like the
That's my
excess stock
suspicion. Yeah, like,
that they're getting rid of.
there's a warehouse full of these games that weren't being moved on. For what it's worth, I think that the Power Rangers game is very similar to the GI Joe game,
Right.
a similar deck building game, and I have a few friends who really enjoy that. And by all accounts, the game is solid if you're a fan of Power Rangers.
Yeah, for sure. And I actually have to admit, I bought the digital Transformers files mostly because I have a problem, and I also like to read RPG source books as just reading material and artwork, and to appreciate the artwork. So obviously, I'm not complaining, but I think it's kind of nice that they are bundles of things that have existed as real retail products. Like, you can go check out the reviews. This is not something like, I don't know, people have been talking about, what was it? EFKA was talking about that Tainted Grail game or something on social media just
Yeah.
recently, right? Nobody's going to buy it from him because he's been trying to sell it.
The secondary market for Kickstarters is drying up. No one has the
Right.
space for these.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the Humble Bundle selling physical products is a little bit different. And if they're serving a market of clearing out these physical products that would just languish on clearance sales for years, then maybe that's a good thing. I don't know.
Hey, and at least you know what you're getting. There's probably plenty of reviews out there for this game. It's a game that's been out in the wild for some time. You can make a more informed decision than when it was on Kickstarter.
Right.
For what it's worth, I also just backed not the physical bundle, but there's another humble bundle for some video games called the Summer Narrative bundle. I think it's called, with some fun looking stuff. One called Highland Song. It's like a hand drawn 2D animated platformer based in Scotland. So trying to recapture some of that vacation vibes. That one looks really good.
Yeah, right now they actually have like a kind of a perfect storm of like really kind of interesting indie games that are not exactly mainstream packages. They're some really kind of kooky titles. I happen to own like one or two of the titles in each bundle, it seems, that are out there. So yeah, right up my alley, really. So they are doing some good stuff there, even though that they've made some missteps like closing up their publishing arm. That's a really sad case. How about yourself? Any more news?
Yeah, a couple of releases I wanted to quickly run through. And I can't remember if we discussed this previously, but there is a new Mass Effect board game coming out called Priority Hagalaz. I don't know how you pronounce that. So this is coming out from Modiphius, who we've been speaking a lot about lately, designed by Eric Lang and Calvin Wongse-Loon. And it's a narrative storytelling game set in the Mass Effect universe. A game that I don't have any particular attachment to the Mass Effect universe, I'll be honest. I really enjoyed that first game, and I've bounced off the second one twice now. I don't know what it is. Something about its mix of sci-fi just does not grab me. I really want to like it though, and I'm curious how this goes, and how it explores that universe in some different ways. And what I particularly appreciate is that for a big profile IP like this, not on Kickstarter, it's going straight to pre-order via Modiphius. You can check that out. And I didn't see that it was also you can purchase separately a bunch of miniatures for the game, and they look like they'd be a pretty good match for the 5 Parsecs from Home, also from Modiphius, that we've been talking about.
There you go. Yeah, I like Modiphius. They are not unfamiliar with some big IPs. Of course, they produce the Fallout tabletop role-playing game, and as well as like 2 separate skirmish war games in the Fallout universe, to name a few. They do Star Trek Adventures, so they're no stranger to IPs, to sci-fi either. And I'm generally pleased with most of the things they put out. Obviously, Eric Lang has a big track record in successful games with interesting designs. So I have no doubt that the Mass Effect board game will be interesting. I played through the trilogy of video games, and I have mixed opinions about it as well. I finished it to the end because kind of sci-fi is my bag, and each of those titles is kind of janky in its own way. But there is some sort of charm in that way as well. It's kind of like the sci-fi A-Team, getting the band back together and blowing some cred up. It was like I don't know, Guardians of the Galaxy before Guardians of the Galaxy, depending on how you play your Commander Shepard, I suppose.
Yeah, I guess it's just a little too pulpy and wisecracking for my sort of flavor of space opera that I'm looking for, I guess. But I have been meaning to try 3. Especially years removed from the whole controversy around the ending and all the. You can get the Legendary Edition with all the extra DLC on Game Pass now, so maybe I'll take a look at that sometime. Okay, so one other release I just want to quickly mention is Lacksmith, holding the B. That is Lacksmith without the B. This is from a former guest of the show, Jamie Daggers. She just released her first game. So this is basically a 2-page TTRPG. You can get it on itch.io for like a name your price, basically. And it's a push your luck dice placement mini game that can easily be added to any fantasy or sci-fi RPG, or just played as a little solo experience. So basically, it's you are an inexperienced blacksmith taking over the family business, and hijinks ensue. So I just downloaded that now. Planning to take a look at that over the next little bit. And looks to be a lot of fun.
Nice, congratulations, Jamie.
Excellent. One more release, that is Moon Bunny by Hot Banana Games, some local friends of ours here in Vancouver. So previously designed Steam Up, which has been winning a whole bunch of awards, and it's been great to see sort of new local designers enjoying quite a lot of success in the game industry. They've been selling them at like Barnes and Nobles, and it's seem to have quite a widespread appeal. And so this is doubling down at exploring that sort of Asian cultural awareness in mooncakes, the mooncake festival, basically. And so this is on Kickstarter right now. It has squishy mooncakes. We had squishy dim sum in Steam Up, and that was a big selling point. We did play this. Did you play this at TCTC? And I briefly demoed it.
Yeah, I didn't get a chance. I saw it being demoed at TCTC. Actually, I think a couple years in a row, possibly. But no, I didn't get a chance. But I'm a big fan of Steam Up, the last game that they put out, and I've interviewed the Hot Banana folks, Murray and Pauline, a couple times now, and they're just fantastic people, and they put out really good work. So I'm eager to check it out, the final product.
Yeah, it's great to see games coming out with a very unique cultural voice, right? They put a lot of details into Steam Up in displaying the culture around dim sum, and looking forward to that level of detail again here in Moon Bunny. The box itself, like on the back, looks like one of those gift boxes that you get the mooncakes in if you go to TNT.
Right.
So yeah, really nice touches there.
If anyone wants to hear a little bit more about Hot Banana Game or Steam Up or Moon Bunny, you can listen to our 50th anniversary episode a few episodes ago, where we interviewed Murray and Pauline on our show and talked to them at length. So learn a little bit more from there.
Excellent. Okay, I think that's about it for the news over here. Shall we get to what games we've been playing?
Yes, I'm going to talk. I'll go first. Okay. I played very briefly a bit of Star Wars Outlaws. That's the brand new game from Ubisoft that is set in the Star Wars universe, of course. And this is I think the first time you get to play as one of the kind of scoundrels, the Scum and Villainy, so to speak, as your primary character. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to say a lot because I haven't played this at length. Basically just got to the tutorial area. And for the most part, I'm liking what I see. It's a very different flavor from a couple of the games that we played more recently, the Jedi Survivor, Jedi Outcast duology, I guess, from EA. Totally different publisher. I feel like the Jedi games have a little bit more polish. They're pretty tight. And I guess their design scope was a little bit tighter as well. They're just like straight up action-y games. And this one is trying to do a little bit more with stealth and thievery and kind of hacking and things like that. So just a different direction in the same universe. But I need to play more of it to give it a full shakeout.
Yeah, I got that on hold at the library right now, but looking forward to trying it. Ubisoft reservations aside, I'm a little burnt out on Star Wars too, but this is exploring some of the the lesser known fringes of that Star Wars galaxy away from the Jedi, which is always exciting. I have heard, I've largely heard good things about this game, but just that it's a pretty slow start before
Right.
it really gets good. So maybe
Yeah,
give it a little bit
I've
of time.
actually heard that it does some nice degree of fan service. Like it does have missions with the huts,
Well,
with
you never escape Tatooine.
Lando, right? With Lando and known characters from the universe. So I'm looking forward to seeing some of those. But that's not the only reason I'm trying it out. I just kind of want to see what Ubisoft does with a slightly different open world style game. And I've actually been pleased with what I played recently, mostly with the latest Prince of Persia game, The Lost Crown, and also the Assassin's Creed Mirage, which is quite polished, and I'm enjoying that quite a bit.
They do seem to be escaping the traditional Ubisoft formula, or distancing themselves a little bit from that.
They're reducing the bloat, and I would say that they're going back,
yeah.
at least for the last two games I mentioned, they're kind of going back to their roots.
A little more focused.
Focusing on core competencies. Yeah, that's right.
Excellent.
How about yourself? Okay. What have you been playing?
Not much in the video game sphere, at least. I've been largely trying to wrap up previous games just before I settle into some new stuff that's been coming out, like Dredge and Yakuza 7, trying to finish. One new game I have been playing in terms of wanting something to play on the Xbox with my daughter around, so I've booted up Dungeons of Hinterburg. So this is on Game Pass, and I'm blanking on the publisher, but it's a relatively recent game. Basically, it's a series of dungeons, sort of very traditional Zelda style dungeons. You've got a lot of pushing blocks around, climbing ladders, pushing switches to sort of create your path forward. Some loose combat and very sort of limited arenas, very much gated arena battles. And it's definitely it was definitely scratching that itch, that sort of old school Zelda itch. It is a little rudimentary, at least for the first few dungeons. Like, it's very scripted, sort of quick time eventy. Like when you're climbing a wall, you're not dynamically clambering. It's just you look at the next ledge, the button A appears, you press A, they jump to that ledge. It's very quick time event, contextual inputs, right? But as I've gotten a little deeper, that does start to branch out a bit. I've just played one dungeon that was very reminiscent of Mario Galaxy in some interesting ways. I don't want to spoil, but I do really start to play with momentum and movement in much more unique senses. So I'd say give it a few dungeons deeper to go. But perhaps the really interesting part here is the framing device, and that each of these dungeons are basically framed like ski slopes. You've come to this Austrian town, like it's set in the real world, in which a few years ago magic suddenly exists. There's dungeons popping up in this small sort of Austrian hinterland tourist town, and now they've got all these tourists coming here to go on these dungeon runs that basically are rated like a ski slope, and you got to work your way from the easy ones and work your way up from there, right? But even in and around that, you've got this framing device of basically the Persona style of these sort of scheduled days, and then relationship levels with the other various people around town. So at the start of the day, you can either go to a dungeon and work through that, or you can go and do some sightseeing to like level up some stats, for example. And in the evening, you can pick one person to go and befriend and get a little bit of flavor and some unique abilities based on who you pick, right? And so it's really interesting to see that deployed, because it's basically always deployed in a school setting, right? Your Persona, your Fire Emblem, your Danganronpa, even, it's always in a school, which makes sense. But it's really interesting to see that framework deployed in a more adult setting, not an adult in the sense of, they're talking about finding yourself and being disenchanted from your job and things like that, not necessarily like sex and violence, but yeah, it's really interesting. They're touching on some interesting themes in terms of, like, is it really ethical for us to be killing these monsters, and like there's big businesses coming in and trying to co-opt this whole tourist experience, and I'm curious if that's going to pay off in any interesting ways, or if they're just playing lip service to asking those questions. But they are at least asking those questions, right? And yeah, it's a really fascinating framing device. the levels do start to get really interesting as you get a little deeper. And yeah, so I've been enjoying Dungeons of Hinterburg.
Yeah, it's good to hear. I played Hinterburg for a couple of hours, and nothing really hooked me about it, but there were some nice, charming qualities to it. To tell you the truth, I'm kind of a bit sick of that Persona style personal links gameplay. I mean, I really loved it to bits in a game like Persona 4 Golden on the Vita. That was really kind of my jam. Maybe it was because it was one of the first games of that style that I played. I even enjoyed Danganronpa 1. Not so much 2. I kind of gave up on that, but it gets a little bit tiresome. And also, it's a little bit, I don't know, it's a little bit, you always feel like you're doing it wrong, like you're choosing the wrong person to hang out with.
Yeah.
And that, usually I'm the kind of just go with it, stick with your guns sort of thing. But everything about it is telling you don't have enough time.
As a completionist, I feel like I'm missing out if I'm not maxing out every relationship. And like, if I'm playing Persona, I have to use one of those guides to make sure I get everything in one playthrough. And it's interesting in this game. In theory, you're only in town for 2 or 3 weeks, which is nowhere near enough time to do a fraction of the dungeons and get to know these people. So I either assume they're really forcing you to make that choice, but more likely they're just going to extend that at some point, right? And I've decided to stay in town. I don't know.
Of course, yeah. Yeah, well, maybe I'll try Hinterburg again.
Yeah, give it to the first ice dungeon, I will say. That's where things really start to branch out a little bit in terms of the mechanics and just the mobility. There's some really cool mobility in that first ice level.
Okay, that's good to know. All right. Speaking of slightly older games, I one of the games I tried booting up was called, or I actually got from the library, is a title called The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening. So this is a remake of, I think, maybe one of the portable Zeldas, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I had this on Game Boy Color.
There you go. Yeah, because I remember playing it before. I remember playing some of these earlier levels, and I was quite early in it because I only got it for a week rental from the library. And I gotta say, I was a little disappointed. Maybe, I don't know, disappointed in the game or disappointed in myself, but it just wasn't reaching me at all, which is really surprising because that game is the package is so attractive. The 3D art is really cutesy. It's really charming. I was apprehensive. I was coming in kind of a little bit cautious because I thought it would be too kind of plasticky and saccharine, but it was actually strikes a nice balance. So no complaints there in terms of the aesthetics. I think maybe it was the very old school game design of it all, and the kind of just like the chore of it all. It became really sort of unfulfilling to just be whacking grass to get one more rupee to play some of the fishing side game or the gacha side game or the claw machine side game. It'd be one thing if it was I had a decent amount of currency to do like in a Yakuza game, then that's fun, as a little dalliance. I'll play that a little bit on the side. But if it's mission critical that I get some of those side items to turn in to advance the story, then it's nothing but a chore simulator at that point. And a real kind of shock to the system after playing some of the more open worldy, some of the more free flowing games in the latter day Legend of Zelda series on Switch. So that one didn't hook me. I hope that this doesn't speak too badly for the forthcoming Legend of Zelda game, the one that's I forget the name of it, the one that
Echoes
features
of Wisdom.
Right.
I think
The one that features Princess Zelda as the protagonist. I'm not saying it's going to be as bad because it is a new game with new ideas. I know it's trying new things. So my hope of hopes is that it is much more inspiring and much more unique than this really kind of really tired rehash.
Well, it is just remaking the original game. They completely rebuilt the engine and the graphics, but the mechanics are basically the same. The structure and how you progress through the quest are still the same. And it was very much that old fashioned. A lot of really obscure problem solving and like secrets, and just got to bomb every wall and hope that you find the secret. Right? There's a lot of things that are hidden that you're relying on game guides and getting the Nintendo Power magazine. Otherwise, you'd never have any chance of finding these things. Right?
Yeah, and it's not like those are new concepts, so I wasn't expecting a lot of new concepts, but that's not even one of the mainline Zelda games, even on portable, right? So I wasn't, I guess I was expecting more, and I shouldn't have, and I wasn't so impressed by it.
It's very nostalgic and cutesy. It's a really weird tone, that game, I would say. I was been reading a little bit recently on about how it was very much inspired by Twin Peaks of all things,
Huh.
and just being a little off the wall. And like there are characters that like it's basically a character who's Mario in this world,
Yeah.
or characters from other Nintendo properties filling different roles here. So everything's just a little familiar, but not familiar in different ways. It's a little strange. Not to spoil it, how that game ends, but there is a reason for all of that. But it's the very, very traditional Zelda dungeons in terms of the very original Legend of Zelda 2D, like tile based dungeons, right?
Yeah, it's not even like letting me get to some of the areas that I want to. Like I am getting to the forest, but it's one of those like mystery forest ones that sends you for a loop.
Memorize it's left, right, up, down, left, right,
Yeah.
left, right, right.
I guess that sort of old school style is just not very fulfilling to me anymore. When I could play like slightly less old school games that I haven't gotten around to, you know. So, anyways, that's more of a me problem that didn't hook me.
Fair enough. Okay. Yeah, well, let's jump across to some board games, which I have quite a few to discuss. I've been trying out quite a few exciting new things lately. So we talked last playlist about going to the Vancouver Game Garden, which put us into a part of
Right?
town that I'd not been to before, and was able to visit a local board game store called Strategies. That I think you might have been to. I hadn't never been there before. And they have quite a large range of like wargaming and miniatures, but also a decent selection of board games. That was fun to check out. But I was pleased to see they had a copy of Daybreak, fresh off its Kennerspiel win, and so about to become very hard to find anywhere. So I made sure to snatch that up. So this is Daybreak from Matt Leacock and Matteo Menapace. So it's basically simulating the climate disaster that we all currently living in. So trying to bring a little bit of hope to that. And there's been a few games that tackle this. It's just trying to have a bit more of a colorful spin on the climate challenge. Basically, you're working cooperatively to stop the carbon footprint. There's carbon being sort of pooled into this big thermometer that's ticking up from like 1 degree above the 1910 threshold, I think it was, and up, if it hits 2 degrees above that threshold, then you lose. And basically, it's ticking up bit by bit. You played a little bit of this with us on Board Game Arena, right?
Indeed.
Yeah. So I'm not sure how much of an impression you got from the digital version.
Yeah, I think there are some interesting things going on there. It seems to require a lot of coordination and
Yes.
in much more, I guess, varied ways than some other cooperative sort of survival games I could think of, like, I don't know, like Pandemic or Dead of Winter or things like that. This one sees you representing nations or groups of nations. And that was fascinating because there's a built-in sort of asymmetry there, right?
Yes.
Everyone, especially of the bigger players, starts off with a different balance of sort of deficits and maybe even advantages. Like, I don't know, population could be an advantage in some ways. So I think it's a sophisticated co-op game, and I could see how it could be very interesting to get good at cooperatively.
Yeah, I
As
don't
a
know
group.
that you saw the full arc of how that communication really changes the tone of this game. And like as you said, based on the player count, you're going to be using different nations, or there's United States, Europe, China, and the majority world, which is kind of like the global south, I guess. But those last two, China and majority world, have it worse off in just about every regard. They have more population or more demand for energy, each increasing each round. They have more dirty energy to try and get rid of. They have worse cards. They just it's really behooves everyone else to help that player because largely each faction is somewhat standalone, right? You have a hand of cards. You have 5 stacks basically that you're playing cards into stacks to either change the action on that stack or to improve it based on little tags. It's very much admittedly based on terraforming Mars, using tags on the cards, and the more tags of a particular type, you might be powering up an ability, right? And so everyone is focused on their own cards and actions. So you're not really interacting directly. You're not going to have backseat alpha gaming because everyone's focused on their own little area. You're playing simultaneously, which keeps the flow going. But because of that imbalance and that asymmetry, at some sooner or later, you have to start helping each other. And there's this really organic, indirect way of encouraging interaction that I find really thematic and unique. And like there are some cards that will come into play that that allow you to trade cards or to give resources to other opponents. Sorry, not opponents, other players. So finding ways in which you can trade resources is part of the challenge in of itself. But then talking through what are you having trouble with? Like I can't get the cards that let me get rid of my dirty energy. Is anyone have the option of helping me out there? And so that's yeah, really fascinating treatment of interaction and cooperation.
Yeah, you're right. I thought the straight off the bat, it does a really good job of effectively conveying the sort of the theme, the narrative at play. That's definitely pushing those subjects really well. The need to coordinate across borders and across regions. You know, we talked about war simulations at the top of the show. I could see this game being used as a simulation to tackle another big global crisis of climate change. You could pull this game out at a climate conference and it would do a good job of simulating a lot of, you know, realistic current day challenges that we're facing from a global perspective, and maybe sow a little bit of sympathy for people who might not see it from the other side, right? The other direction.
I know that it's going to reach the people who need to learn those lessons, unfortunately. But yeah, all the cards in this game basically represent real technology. They all have little QR codes. You can scan them that double as both more information about that technology, but also like rules clarification if you need it. So that's I've always bristled a little bit at QR codes on my in my games, which more on that very soon. But it really fits in with the graphic design here and the theme. It actually works quite well and it's in a very unobtrusive way. And it is perhaps a little hopeful in the sense that you basically win as long as you don't hit 2 degrees. Whether you get to 1.1 degrees or 1.9 degrees, you still win the game, right? So it's not really anticipating like winning by degrees. It's very binary in that sense, which is a bit of an oversimplification, but it is a very fascinating way of modeling at least the social dynamics, if not necessarily the science dynamics. Yeah,
Right.
it's a fascinating game. It works both as an educational sort of prompt, but also it's a fun game. Like I've played it solo, and that system of playing the cards to the 5 stacks is just a fascinating little engine builder. Like, for each card in my hand, I can either play it on top to create a new action. I can slot it underneath to add tags to an existing action. I can discard it to trigger potentially a different action. So there's so many options in how you mix and match these stacks in some really dynamic ways.
Yeah, you don't often see cooperative engine builders, so that part of it works quite well.
Yeah. So looking forward to digging back into Daybreak.
Nice. Well, I haven't played a lot of board games, so keep talking.
Well, yeah, let's talking about QR codes. So I'm curious, have you played Chronicles of Crime?
No, I haven't, but I think I know what you're going to tell me about. Yeah, please go on.
Yeah, so in Chronicles of Crime, I may have talked about previously. It's basically Lucky Duck's sort of proprietary QR code system for generating stories. They've used it both in Chronicles of Crime and then later in Destinies, which is more of a fantasy role playing game, and it's basically works as a bit of a point and click adventure, right? So in Chronicles of Crime, it's a murder mystery game. You scan a location, you scan a character in that location, and then you can scan another character or an item to ask them about that thing and to try and piece together this mystery. And I found it a really fascinating, probably my favorite of those sort of murder mystery games like Sherlock Holmes Consulting Detective, in that the Chronicles of Crime system remembers where you've been. Like in Consulting Detective, you can go to any one of 100 locations, and it never matters what order you did them in, right? So you get these weird glitches sometimes where someone's talking about something you haven't seen yet, or vice versa. So Chronicles of Crime, yeah, really, really dynamic way of integrating that, and at least the game feels like it has a memory because it's controlling who you can talk to based on the cards you have in front of you. It can sort of railroad what it thinks you know in some really interesting ways. So, all that said, I dug out a game called Kids Chronicles, also from Lucky Duck Games, and this is basically using that same system for like a kids fantasy storytelling game. I've been interested in getting my daughter into some light role playing and storytelling, and thought this would be a good place to start. It's very sort of very scripted and railroaded, and without sort of having to learn a new GM system. But again, it works like a very simple point and click adventure. You're helping Merlin to solve some quests around the kingdom. Oh, the prince has been kidnapped. Let's go find him. And so the actual solving is very simple. Like, as an adult playing, it's pretty obvious what's going on here. But you go and talk to one character, and they'll direct you to another character, and then someone's stuck in the mud. They have the information you need, but they're stuck in the mud. Which of these 3 items we have do you think help them get them out of the mud? And do you think it's the
Sounds
sword?
like Dora the Explorer a lot.
Yeah, it's a little bit. And but that said, when my daughter made that connection and seeing I can use this rope and throw it to the person, she was so excited to figure that out and make that connection, right? And sometimes you have to make some leading questions in terms of trying to prompt them for the answer. It's like asking a kid, "What did you do at school today?" Right? You have to be really specific and try and lead them to the answer. But it is interesting in two that I can be something of a GM and try and drop hints based on where she's at in the game, right? Or if you're playing with multiple kids, you can try and trying to GM a little bit to keep everyone included and contributing. And so it's a very simple game that's easy to solve, but it is fun playing through. There was some cute moments in the story where it's like you're chanting out you're chanting out spells basically that were a lot of fun for her. I mean, there was some references to bottoms if you're trying to keep it really family friendly here, but she of course loved that. And so yeah, we're really enjoying that as a very light sort of introductory sort of role playing experience. That's Kids Chronicles. There are 2 of these games, basically, but each of them standalone. I think it's like Quest of the Moonstones. I think is this one, big purple cat on the front.
Very nice. Yeah, I had no idea that those games were related when you started mentioning Kids Chronicles, so that's exciting. And we'll talk about role-playing games later, but you definitely have to lead your players on, lead them to water, so to speak, as a GM, even when playing with adults. So don't be too shocked there. That's definitely part of the activity.
Well, why don't we tangent into some role playing games? I actually did just over the weekend pick up No Thank You Evil,
Very good.
which had been recommended from Monty Cook Games. I don't know if you'd mentioned this, but a few people had recommended it as a great sort of entry level role playing system for kids. So I've still got to start. I've got to start reading through that, but my daughter's quite interested in checking that out.
Yeah, very nice. Surprisingly, No Thank You Evil is a cipher game. If you break it down, there are ciphers in No Thank You Evil. You should have let me know. I have a copy of it. My kids are too old to play it, so no, it's highly recommended. Yeah, I guess I'll talk a little bit about the RPGs I've been playing. Of course, we're preparing more closely for our Scum and Villainy game that's coming up. That's shaping up well. We're putting together
my character.
Very nice. And we're going to have a session 0, which is already scheduled for about a week or so from now. and there seems to be at least like 5 or 6 people that are interested, possibly more by
There'll
the
be some
time that
natural
day
attrition
rolls
as
around.
we figure out the schedule, but we'll see.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fine. Like,
Mm.
if people are just curious and want to try something out, like, I want to support people to try out new, potentially, non D&D games. So that's great for them. So the game that I have been reading and playing simultaneously is City of Mist. So I've talked
Mm.
about that before, just
Yes.
the basics, but I'll just say that I had the second session of my City of Mist mini campaign, just playing one of the missions out of the original GM's guide for City of Mist. It's called the MC's Toolkit. And it's a pretty basic adventure, but it still took me a little bit to wrap my head around. And what I've been trying to do is trying to be a little bit more flexible as a GM and rely more on an ability that I think I do have to a decent degree, is which the ability to improvise.
Mm.
I think GMs have to have some ability to improvise. Maybe it's not 100% of a story, but you have to be able to adapt to the player's unexpected responses, right? You don't want to be so dogmatic and so kind of, railroady that the players are just sort of like actors reading your script, right? There shouldn't just be one solution to any problem, or at least I believe that. So City of Mist has this cool system that they encourage sort of non-linear play.
Hmm.
So they have this what they call a iceberg model, and there's a diagram of it in the MC's toolkit, and probably in the free quick start guide as well. But their theory is that iceberg is floating on the surface, and you see like little clues, you see leads, right? But you're not necessarily going to hit this lead first or that lead first or that lead first. So it's wide at the top, and then you're going to sort of ping back and forth between different so follow-up clues in the scenes that follow some of those leads. So this is basically like a branching diagram, or like a grid that sort of narrows into a climax at the bottom. So yes, we are all headed to a final end, kind of like the Mass Effect trilogy.
Or like a Telltale Adventures game.
Right.
Everything comes back to the same place.
Right. But the places you hit along the way might be completely different.
Yeah.
So as from a GM's perspective, I have to know roughly who the players are, and I have to know roughly what sort of key scenes could occur, but I don't tell them where they should go. They have to leave that for themselves. So it took me like weeks to sort of wrap my head around this. And also in the first session, which was a while back, I largely improvised like a whole new original scene to get the players to even meet together. Because I didn't want the old you meet in a tavern sort of scenario. And this being a modern game with fantasy elements, that wouldn't have worked out perfectly anyways. Just wanted to say City of Mist is really exciting. It's really fluid. It shares similar Powered by the Apocalypse DNA as the Scum and Villainy system based on Blades in the Dark. So it shares some similarities, but they're different enough. I personally think City of Mist and the Son of Oak game engine is a little bit easier for me because it encourages the characters are all based off of tags. So they have basic like rough descriptions like Slinks in the Shadows or something like that, right? Slinks in the Shadows is entirely thematic. There's no number associated with that, right? And it also doesn't strictly define what you can do with that. It's much more loose and interpretive, and I really like that. And I think
it's like little prompts, right, to give you a launching board. Yeah,
it's a prompt for the GM, but it's also a prompt for the player. Like a player can look through those and be like, "Oh, would this help in this situation?" And most of the time, some of the times it doesn't. Some of the times, people are trying to push, that whatever monkey wrench when they should use a hammer. But oftentimes they're like, what about if I throw this in? And it might give them the impetus to approach a problem in a unique way. So I really like that.
Yeah, the need for improvisation is definitely what scared me away from TTRPGs the most. But I'm really starting to learn just how powerful those prompts can be deployed correctly, right, or with the right amount of detail. You can really use those to launch into some ideas in some really fascinating ways. But obviously, it's going to depend too on like, is this a scripted adventure or is this a GM created like a homebrew, or what system? The systems change so much how much of the improv is demanded, right? But yeah, I'm interested to explore that some more. The Scum and Villainy definitely looks to encourage that improvisation on both the GMs and the players in this sort of weird, strangely collaborative process.
Right. Reading that has been really interesting
Mm.
at the same time as playing City of Mist, because there's no pre-written adventures that I've been able to find. I haven't looked that hard.
Yeah.
But when I was starting to think about this process of getting familiar with Scum and Villainy, I thought, oh, hey, I like sci-fi. I could probably whip up a story that's not too bad. Maybe rip off some sci-fi TV shows or movies that I've seen over the years. And then I started reading the philosophy behind Scum and Villainy a bit more. And I realized like that's exactly what they want you to not do.
You're really at the whim of the players, I think. And you're just there to throw wrenches in what they're trying to do.
Yeah, you might be able to like give them sort of like that City of Mist example I presented. Give them sort of like, instead of using all 30 factions, maybe you might be playing with these 5 factions. And that gives the GM a little bit of tighter focus so that they can spend time maybe building up some NPCs, maybe building up some set pieces. But if I do end up being the GM for this Scum and Villainy session, which I assume I am, I'm not going to plan anything. Like, I'm not going to plan any scenes. I'm not going to set up any like end. I'm not going to set up any end to it. I'm just going to do those things. I'll have
You
a
have
few
puzzle
characters
pieces that you can pull from as necessary, basically.
Yeah, some suggestions, some rough directions, but I'm hopefully going to see where the players lead. And that's part of where the session 0 is for as well, is because I want the players, like, you're going to be one of the players. I want you to be able to say, like, is this Guardians of the Galaxy, or is this Star Trek, or is this The Mandalorian, or is this Battlestar Galactica, or
a lot of
is
options
this
for setting
Doctor
the
Who?
tone of the campaign. Yeah,
Right. Or is this Alien? Like, it has so many things it could be. So I want to make a fun game that the players as a group enjoy.
Interesting. Yeah, so looking forward to kicking that off, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that more down the road. So one thing I quickly wanted to talk about is that I am fast learning that even more so than in board games, reading and collecting TRPGs is just as much a hobby as actually playing them.
Oh man.
I've been acquiring a few new ones to look through. I dropped by our friendly local gaming store, Rain City Games, this last week, and was pleased to see they really improved their selection of independent and like Zions and other weirder TTRPG selections. I was able to find the Wild Sea. Speaking of Quinn's earlier, I think it was the first game he covered on Quinn's Quest. So
Yeah,
it's
I
been
think that's
very
right.
hard to find. So I don't think you talked about that previously on TCTC.
Yeah, I did play a session of Wild Sea, and I really enjoyed it.
But the thing I was most interested in, and like spoke to me in this very personal way of like this was made for me, was sitting on the shelf there. And for those who aren't watching on video, this is basically a very beige little book. Looks like an academic journal titled Old Morris Cave, a continuous use campsite in Mammoth Cave National Park. And flicking through it, looks like a very dry academic journal about the history of a cave. You've got some archaeological Harris matrix diagrams there, and I'm flicking through this in the store and just captivated. Like, what is this? What am I looking at? Turns out what this is 1,000-year-old Campfire, not to be confused with game from the same designer, 1,000-year-old Vampire. So whereas Vampire was a solo journaling game, this is kind of a follow-up weird sidestep sequel, and that you were exploring the historical and cultural use of a campfire, like a cave site, over 1,000 years. And you're not journaling, you are creating your own archaeological strata. And so, as someone like I studied archaeology at university, I know I've needed to scratch that itch for years now, having not working in that field anymore, obviously. So very excited to dig into that. And you don't have to, like, there's no journaling, right? So I don't have the anxiety of trying to write. But some really fascinating use of history as culture, history as storytelling, that I'm really excited to explore. That is 1,000-year-old Campfire.
Yeah, I saw that very title on the shelf of Rain City Games before you had mentioned it to me. And I thought, wow, this looks really out of place. It looks like it's not
It
a
was
game.
misfiled.
Right. And I think that was the intention, right? It's supposed to look like an artifact of the, I don't know, anthropology or archaeology professions. So for that, it's really succeeding. And I'm really getting swept away by zine publications of RPGs as well. Like, there's such pieces of beautiful artwork. They're such uniquely designed pieces. They come in a range of different sizes and lengths and formats.
Terrible storing
And
on your shelf, of course, but still
sure,
fantastic physical artifacts.
yeah. Well, I'm sure you could make an interesting display of it if you set your mind to it. But they are sort of like indie rock music, compared to the big mainstream tentpole release from
Very
like a
punk
long.
rock, right?
Yeah, they are doing their own thing, as you just clarified. They're covering
Conventions be
their own
damned.
subject matter. They are really breaking down barriers. They're treading new ground, and they don't have the baggage, right? They don't have the baggage of some of these older systems that are in their fifth or sixth or eighth editions. That they have these a built-in audience that will decry any advancement, any new stuff.
And there's no expectation that this has to last players for 10 years of gameplay, right? It's going to tell a unique experience, get in, get out, and like, hey, this is something I'm never going to experience again.
Right, and some of these games might be short enough and inexpensive enough to just make a one shot of. I mean, I mentioned Eat the Reich, the other episode with, I think it was with Dennis Ryan, is intended to be played 2 or 3 times, and that's it. There's no character creation. There's no advancement system. You're supposed to play it. You're supposed to have a riveting, intense time, and it's supposed to be done.
And there can be something very powerful about how ephemeral those experiences are.
Right. Even Scum and Villainy, I was surprised to see that it's recommended that you don't play this game forever.
It's like 12 sessions or something.
Right. Like,
it has an arc, right? Once you've maxed out your stats, like, what's the point? You've seen the arc. Like,
it's
just
sort of like
the engine again.
It's sort of like a really clever Canadian or Australian sci-fi show that lasted for 2 or 3 seasons, right? Instead of those long-running American shows that really shouldn't have been around as long as they have been.
Well,
so
speaking
I
of
really
running
appreciate
long,
it.
I think we should wrap it up there.
There you go. Yeah. Some more games that we covered. All right, so let's wrap it up there. That's our playlist episode. And do you want to tell the listeners a little bit about what we're covering next episode?
Yeah, so I think we mentioned previously we're going to be covering Flintlock: The Siege for Dawn. So this is a new game, it's an action adventure Souls light-ish game, which I'm sure we'll talk more about. You can get it on Game Pass and most other platforms: PC, Xbox, PlayStation.
That's right. I'm about halfway through it, so I gotta finish that up. There's fun to be had there. I'm enjoying my time so far. Don't want to give too many spoilers, but it has some fun things going for it.
Yeah, and so if you were to join the club and have any thoughts on that or any other games we've been discussing today, you can contact us at omnigamersclub@gmail.com or at our website, omnigamers.club.
Right. And if you haven't yet, go check us out on YouTube. We're pushing these videos about once a week whenever they're ready to go. So subscribe there, leave us comments, and let us know what you think of our walls of collectibles.
And as we mentioned last episode, we did have some technical issues recently that should be mostly fixed now. I think on Apple and Spotify, you shouldn't really see a difference. If you're listening through a third-party podcatcher, you may need to resubscribe. But if you're listening to this, you've probably figured that out. But just for what it's worth, right now it is particularly appreciative for any reviews or ratings you can leave us to help spread the love and help others to join the club.
Right? Go tell a friend if you think that they would be interested, or if they already are subscribed and might need to resubscribe to listen to our new episodes. So thank you so much for your support.
And thank you, Mark.
Of course. Well, that's been the games we've been playing. So until next time, hope you all listening have a balanced diet of gaming.
Bye.
Bye.